but also to review for the commissioners sort of some of the things we're working on. Right now, we have a number of subcommittees that are working on various aspects of some changes to the ordinance related to sea level rise, floodplain, buffers, and other things. But we're taking a big picture look first, which is to say, we're not jumping into individual ordinance changes immediately. We're going to take a look at a broad brush first. We're going to have our water workshop, hopefully Tom and Janelle, early in December, and benefit from the input from the water workshop as it relates to Lewes. And that's really the focus of our efforts. We're really trying to, as Mayor and City Council ask us to do, to concentrate our efforts on making changes, improvements in the Lewes code as it relates to those issues that I've just broadly outlined. We're going to be very deliberate in our efforts. We're going to not rush to just come up with some individual ordinance recommendations, but trying to put it together. We're going to put an action list, to take the action list and put it together on a priority basis. We're then going to report to Mayor and City Council, hopefully in January, if not, the Mayor has said February, to give them an outline of what we intend to do over the next 6 months or so in 2021. And then we will go forth and attempt to accomplish a lot of things that I know many of you are interested in, have expertise in, and think are overdue for the city to work on. So we will be doing that. And I expect after roughly the first 6 months, we'll take a little break. We have some applications that'll be coming up over the next 8 to 10 months. But then we'll take a little rest. And then in the fall, we're going to focus our attention on updating the comp plan. Every 5 years or so, we should take a look at it, and we'll have to incorporate the changes we recommend to Mayor and City Council that they adopt, and then update the planning, the comp plan for the end of the year. So really next year is the year of the planning for the Planning Commission. Hopefully we'll be able to concentrate on a lot of these efforts. And I congratulate and thank all of you who are working on the subcommittees, because that's really the meat of the matter. And did you not know, but now you will be reminded that in the future, when you are the subject committee chair or the lead on a subject matter, you'll be required to do some reporting. We're going to develop a more comprehensive report at the commission level on any of the changes we recommend, the alternatives that were considered, the resources that were brought to bear on it, and the recommendations that are forthcoming from a subcommittee or a subject matter lead. Once the commission reviews all of that and acts on it, we will update the report and then forward that to Mayor and City Council. When Mayor and City Council meet, we will have the subcommittee chair or the lead, subject matter lead, make a presentation on the decision of the commission. It is not the chair who will make the presentation, it is the subcommittee chair or the lead, subject matter lead on the particular matter. In order to respond to the Mayor and City Council's request to have more information, not only are we going to provide a report, but we're going to provide the most knowledgeable person on the commission who dealt with this matter from the beginning, and will be there to answer questions and explain the rationale, the decision-making process, what went into it, what was excluded, what was included, and other factors that may be of interest to Mayor and City Council. We hope this is going to enhance our presentation, and I think it will help the public as well to understand a lot of what happens. An offshoot of that, of course, is the record will be perfected. We'll have a good written record of the decision-making process, which should make Glenn happy with or without his time. We have a lot that we have already undertaken. We've got some more we're going to do, and tonight, Sumner Crosby has stepped up and agreed to take on another request from Mayor and City Council at September's meeting, which he's going to head up a subcommittee on AX and AXR. We'll be filling that out shortly, but we're going to respond to the Mayor and City Council by getting started looking at that as part of this process. And then we're going to go forward and see how we bring that into the fold with everything else that's under consideration. I know some of us are very anxious about at least a couple areas of annexation, and hopefully we'll be able to review that and get back to Mayor and City Council with whatever recommendations the commission ultimately makes. So unless there are some questions, I'm going to ask that we turn to the Dutchman's harvest report, the revised plan, and I'm going to turn to Janelle to give us an overview of her report and the changes that are before us, and explain the process, which is a little bit different by which we're going to review this matter going forward.
Hey, Drew, it's Bonnie. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just have a suggestion on the quality improvements that you were just describing. I think it would be helpful to everybody if there was a template report developed.
We intend to do that.
Okay, so that everything, and then obviously Janelle and the staff are going to have a lot of input, but I think if it's regularized, that'll help both the authors and the receivers.
Agreed. Kay had already pointed that out and was taking a first stab at that.
Terrific. Thank you.
So great minds think alike, Kay and Bonnie. All right. Janelle, you want to take us through the process by which we're reviewing this revised plan? And Glenn, if you want to chime in at any point, please feel free. And then take us through your review of the revised plan, Janelle. And Anne Marie, who do we have from, oh, there's Preston. I see Preston. Okay.
And we also have Zach Crouch for his engineer for the project.
Great.
Janelle,
so go forward.
Okay, so this is actually a site plan. This is different than what you typically have seen in the past as subdivisions. So, and this also is goes through the process a little bit differently than what is stated in code, because the code got amended after this project already started. So this project falls under the old section of the site plan process code. So just keep that in mind if you're looking at the code. It doesn't follow that process because this again preceded that section of code from existence. So what this is the site plan process, and I'm just going to give this for everybody in the public. What happens for this project is that it was originally reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission. They did that back in August of 2019. They made recommendations with a number of conditions. That was sent to City Council. City Council held a public hearing, approved the plan subject to those conditions, and I think they changed a few other items. And then the final step is for me to make sure, staff, to make sure they're in compliance with all agency approvals and all of those conditions of approvals. So as they were working on getting their agency approvals and looking at other items, they needed to, based on some agency comments, they needed to redesign the site. So what they've done is, it's still attached housing units, still 140 units, 14 buildings. The layout has changed. You'll notice that there were 2 buildings closer towards Savannah Road. Now there's only 1, and it's actually been pushed back farther because they had talked about being townhouses, but now it's attached units. So they're actually, the setback increased from 20 feet to 30 feet. So it's actually, the buildings are set back further from Savannah Road. There was also a connector road that kind of went through the internal drive area for that. That has been reduced, which actually greatly reduced their lot coverage, because the maximum lot coverage is 60%. The original plan came in at almost 70%, and they are now under 60%. They're at like 59%. So they're actually more in compliance with the code. A few other things that it changed. Mainly the reasoning behind this, again, the developer, Preston Shell, provided a letter, it was in the packet, stating that they had ran into some stormwater management issues. So if you remember their original design, there was a smaller pond for stormwater management near the entrance of Savannah Road. And then there was one back in the corner near the assisted living, and some smaller ones in the middle. Well, the one in the back near the assisted living has gone away. And then the ones in the middle increased in size, as did the one along Savannah Road, which changed the layout of the buildings and the drive aisle, which is why that one drive aisle was reduced, which actually then helped with their impervious surface coverage. They did provide a landscape plan. They are providing landscaping, and to note that as part of the original plan, their landscaping along Henlopen Gardens has been installed. They might need to, and they have additional plantings throughout the site for the development of it, and everything that you need. And so staff did, again, the main changes were that slight change to the internal layout. It was just that one connect road design. The aesthetic of the buildings has changed slightly. The original development, the one that was approved, had garages. this proposal does not have a garage, so the layout has changed. Actually, and then it even pushed the buildings further away from Henlopen Gardens by several feet. Again, interior layout is still a mixture of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom dwelling units. They're just going to be stacked. It's still 10 maximum, 10 units per building, which is the maximum allowed per the zoning code. And again, all those conditions still in place. All the requirements are still in place. None of those have changed. So what you're looking at is, you know, are there concerns with the changes that have been made? Again, the conditions still in effect. Those have not changed. They will still have to comply with all of those. They still have to comply with all their agency reviews and approvals before they can get approval. So, and again, this process, you'll make a recommendation again to the council. Council will make a final decision, and then they will work with their agency approvals. Unlike a subdivision, which would go back, get all their approvals first. This one you're looking at now, council will look at, and then when they say it's okay, then they'll work with their agency approvals, and staff will ensure that all the conditions are complied with and everything meets the code as required by the city code. And I'm happy to answer questions if I missed something. The plan is in compliance with the city code as it was submitted back in early October.
There are questions for Janelle at the moment?
Yeah, Janelle, shouldn't they be called multifamily units? Because a townhouse is 1 unit all the way up to the roof.
This is not
a definition.
Townhouse. This falls into a definition of attached dwellings. So it's not multifamily, it's the attached dwellings.
Okay.
And they did provide, and that was in your packet, an example of a floor plan. I want to make sure everybody understands the example of the floor plan did have additional units. That was just for an example of kind of what the layout would look like. And they did provide an example of the architecture of the site, but this is not townhouses, this is attached dwellings. So it will be 10 units per building.
So just to clarify, Janelle, from my benefit, this is Preston speaking. Is it still considered attached dwellings even if there's people living in separate units on top of each other?
Yes.
Okay.
I had a couple of questions. If I was going to wait until after the commission asked their questions, but yeah, when you get to me, if someone else hasn't asked them.
Oh, go ahead.
Janelle? Okay. But there seems to be no open space on here. Is there any open space requirement in the zoning district?
It was previously it was 10%, and they are providing 40% open space.
Okay, but there's no recreational facilities for any kids or anything?
There are not, and there were none required per the code.
There's no visitors parking either.
There is not. And there was, let me grab that condition real quick. Because the original conditions were in the packet. Yes.
Can you put the, do you have the site plan to be able to put on the screen? We got something in the chat saying it would be helpful to see the layout.
Yep,
okay.
Give me just a minute. I'm just triple checking the conditions regarding Mr. Hockner's question. Because I believe I did bring that up. It said to provide adequate overflow parking should be provided.
Okay.
They are meeting the requirement of 280 units,
Right.
parking spaces. And that was what was shown, I believe, on the previous plan. So.
Yeah, so if on the parking, we had a large discussion on this during the first round, and there is no overflow parking, and there's no on-street parking. And at the time, one of the discussions was that since there were garages and driveways, the driveways would actually act as surge parking. But now, since there's no garages, there is literally 2 parking spaces per unit. And I'm not sure how that works with these being 1, 2, 3-bedroom units and holidays and other things. So yes, they're meeting the bare minimum of the code, but I think this is going to be an issue with parking.
I can speak to that if it's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Preston.
So we've built, I don't know, maybe 15 condominium projects throughout the greater Lewes Rehoboth area over the last 20 years or so, all of which don't have 1-bedroom units. And all of which, with the exception of 2, because they were built under the old code that required 3 parking spaces per unit, have 2 parking spaces per unit. None of which are at a lack for parking on July 4th weekend. We actually used to go, but if I could find these videos, I'll send them to everybody. We used to send somebody on a Saturday morning at 6 a.m. of July 4th weekend, so we could prove for future applications that extra parking wasn't needed, with a camera to drive through our sites to show that there were still some parking spaces available. And keep in mind, these were buildings that are larger from the square footage perspective and did not have 1-bedroom units. And we had enough parking. So we have kind of concrete on the ground evidence that there should not be a parking problem here. Now, I want a caveat to that is none of these other projects are workforce housing projects. So, you know, that may cause a difference in parking demand, but with the 1-bedrooms we have, and with the fact that a lot of people, even in 2 bedrooms, don't have 2 cars, particularly people that are buying in a workforce housing project and may not be able to afford to have 2 cars, I have zero apprehensions about not having enough parking for both the people staying there and their visitors.
And I'm just also going to point out there is a requirement they need to reach out with DART to look at about being accessible to bus transportation. That is a requirement. They need to reach out to DART to look for potential possibility of installation of a bus stop.
Can I follow up on Tom's point? Because I agree with him. Janelle, in this zoning, I assume that there's the usual requirement for 2 off-street parking spaces is not applicable. Is that right?
No, it's a requirement for 2 off-street parking spaces is required. That's the only parking requirement for this development.
So I'm missing something. If there aren't garages, are these going to be, maybe it's in a piece of this paper that I don't have. Are these going to be head-in type things like you see at Eagles Landing and stuff like that? Okay, and are these going to be dedicated parking spaces that say, you know, these parking spaces go with unit 5?
I have an answer for that, if that's okay. We will typically dedicate 1 spot per unit, but not 2. So we want to make sure that they have at least 1 spot, particularly if it's, well, we'll have handicap spots. So that, you know, if it's a handicapped person, we might even dedicate a handicap spot to that person if we're legally allowed to do that. But we'll dedicate 1 and then leave so there'll be 140 dedicated spots and 140 open kind of first come, first served spots.
Okay, and Mr. Shell, have you ever done any surveys of the people who are in the developments you were describing as to whether they've had any parking problems? Because Saturday mornings are sort of atypical in terms of
Saturday mornings of July 4th weekend?
Still, I mean, I'm just asking if you've ever, it seems
Yeah,
to me
I mean, yeah, it's
Saturday from July 4th weekend, people are probably downtown watching all those great games. So my question
at
is,
6 a.m.?
well, I don't know what time you do these films.
Oh.
It's 6 a.m.
Yeah, so we've looked at them at 6 a.m. So we tried to get there before people pulled out, but we have never had, and I say this without being the guy that maybe they're calling, but it's never gotten to me. We've never had a complaint of inadequate parking at any of our for sale condominium projects in the Rehoboth Lewes area.
I have to push back a little bit because this is designed as workforce housing. So it's aimed at people who work at BB, the school district, the city and such. And you have to assume that you're going to have in general, 2 people working in most of those households. So the idea that there aren't going to be at least 2 cars, and if it's a family with a grown child or a child of driving age, more than that, seems to be difficult to believe or to understand how that could happen. The other thing with the parking is that, unlike before, almost 1/4 of the parking is remote from the actual units. I mean, it's in distant spots. So you're going to have parking spaces that are going to be hundreds of yards away from the units. And that, as opposed to the way it was designed before with garages and driveways, seems like it's a concern.
Well, and I think if I can say something, I think I probably speak for at least some of us, and that we're very disappointed that this has happened. Every commission, every committee, every department gave to make this work because we believe in the idea. And if what's causing the change is adhering to Sussex Conservation District advice, is there any way to accommodate that? Could you do an under pavement system and return to the previous design? But what I was concerned about also is in your letter, it sounded like there'd be a lot of compaction to the site, which would only make things worse.
There
But
won't
is
be
an under
compaction.
pavement?
There won't be compaction to where the stormwater management ponds are.
Is it under pavement possible?
Not affordably, not in a workforce housing project. That, I mean, to do under pavement facilities to accommodate the amount of stormwater flow that that big front pond is accommodating would cost about $2 million.
Yeah, and to follow on to Kay's point, you know, everyone has, first of all, we all acknowledge that the comp plan has had it for at least 2 cycles, the need for affordable housing. And we, I think all, I speak personally, think that affordable housing is laudable. But from the very beginning, the zoning change to R5 and onward has been all to accommodate affordable housing. But we've now gone from the big house design to what's basically row housing, which adds to one of the concerns, which was a recommendation in the original review of reducing the linearity, the blockiness of the design with the stormwater ponds. And now we've got blocks of flats with rectilinear ponds and every other portion of the space basically paved. And a very high density with all the additional traffic. Well, the traffic is the same, but the traffic on Savannah Road. And I'm just wondering if we haven't gotten to the point where the pros are outweighed by the cons of this site.
I hope not, but I'll tell you, Tom, I think we're going to need to find out what people think about this, because this is significantly different, and everyone worked very hard to come to a comfort level. One thing, is it possible to shift some of this cost to the property next door? Because that was done with BPW, I believe.
We've already done that with the land. So we've reduced the land price. We pushed $4 million of the $5.1 million BB land cost onto the senior living facility. And that's as
Right.
much as it's willing to absorb. Look, I don't really appreciate, I've also worked hard to make this work. And it's almost as if everybody speaking hasn't read my letter. This is, the initial change was a result of the fact that the site is accommodating a lot more stormwater from surrounding sites than we anticipated. And the way that the code is written, we have to continue to accommodate that water if it's surface flowing on our property until those other properties are developed. If that was not the case, if the Warrington property were developed and the Louder Mitchell farm were totally developed right now, we might have been able to handle the stormwater capacity of our site on the ponds that we had shown. In addition, we had poor infiltration rates. And you really don't know those until you get into the engineering phase of the project. You make a best guess estimate based upon your general knowledge of the soils, and you do some tests sometimes before you put together a concept plan, and you hope that they're accurate. But in this particular case, the infiltration rates were lower. That must mean that there's a clay layer down there somewhere, or just the soils are relatively poor. So we had to amend the site. When we amended the site, we lost 2 buildings. When we lost 2 buildings, the overall cost of everything continued to escalate because a lot of costs are spread over that number of units you have, and the costs don't go down proportionately. They only really go down proportionally for vertical construction costs. They don't go down for anything else when you lose units. So the cost went even higher. At that point, Diamond State Community Land Trust said, look, we're already running into a brick wall trying to raise money, extra money to bring the price points down because the price points are so high to begin with. Because your architecture is so expensive because you have 450 square foot garages. And I said, okay, let me try to get these units back. But if I do, I'll have to change the architecture. And she said, look, if you do change the architecture, could you try to find something that's a little bit more reasonable and more targeted toward local workforce? Something that's a lot more affordable? And I said, absolutely. And so we went out there and we looked around the entire market. We found what I refer to as a stacked townhome product, which is far more affordable, but it's also relatively attractive. I think in your package you have, it doesn't look boxy or linear. I mean, almost every townhome building I've ever built, by the way, is linear. And so that's just the nature of the efficient design. But this, because you have some 1-bedroom units, some 2-bedroom units, and some 3-bedroom units, it jogs back and forth throughout the building, which gives it a little bit more architectural appeal than if they were all the exact same size and kind of went straight across. So it helps from an architecture standpoint. So it's not an ugly building. It's a heck of a lot more affordable, which we make a lot less money on this project. I know people, accuse developers of having ulterior motives, but we make far less money developing the plan I showed you now than if we developed the big house plan, because we've committed to keeping the market rate units at 15% above our costs. Obviously, if our costs go down, that 15% goes down as well. So I tried really hard to make this work, but I can tell you, if the commission doesn't like it, I'm happy to not do it. I'm perfectly happy to not do it. Perfectly happy to put this on the market and sell it to an affordable housing developer, a non-for-profit, and have them see if they can work something out with you all. Like, I consider myself doing this as a courtesy to the local workforce in Lewes and as a courtesy to the City of Lewes Planning Commission and City Council. But if I'm going to sit here and accused of kind of bait and switching for some motive that I don't have, I don't need that.
So Preston, I just want to, I am not accusing you of bait and switching. I understand the engineering process, and I understand that you came up with constraints. And I really commend both you and Diamond State for all the work you put into this. I know you've tried to make it work. So if I came across that way, I apologize. However, as your representative of the city, we have to balance the pros and cons. And that's all I was trying to do. So I apologize if you took it that way.
And thank you. And I understand you guys are doing your job, so I'm not offended. But we have more open space. It's no more linear than the old plan. If Janelle pulls up the old plan and pulls up the new plan, it looks less dense because the building envelope's smaller. The buildings are further away from Henlopen Gardens. We're still incurring the extra site costs of essentially building the ponds on the high side. We made a point of making sure the ponds that were visible to the residents of Henlopen Gardens, which they really can't see anymore anyway, because we've already put the buffer in. We put that in a year before we even settled on the land. Like, we've done everything we can to accommodate the interests of our surrounding neighbors, and we've struggled to come up with a site plan, and we've lowered the unit prices approximately $75,000 to $100,000. From a strictly workforce housing project perspective, this plan is far better than the old plan. In my letter, which hopefully everybody read, I outlined how much more affordable it got. Like, this is going to be, if you grab someone off the street that was part of the Lewes local workforce and said, would you rather buy a 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit for $185,000, or would you rather buy one for $256,000? I'm pretty sure we all know what the answer would be. So it's a better project as a workforce housing project. As a developer for-profit project, it's a far worse project. But as percentage of open space, proximity to neighbors with your buildings, traffic generation's the same. It's not a worse plan.
Can I ask what the purpose of all of the do not park areas are? Because those could be
that's a
additional
fire marshal. That's a fire marshal requirement. They need 15 feet of undisturbed access, so no parking, to reach both their. Remember, these buildings are still sprinklered because you still have people living on top of other people. The prices go way down if you turn them strictly into townhomes and you don't have people living on top of other people, but then the site gets way too dense. I mean, that's truly an ugly plan if we tried to fit 140 townhomes on it. But then it wouldn't have to be sprinklered. But so they need a connection to the sprinkler, and then they want 15 feet on either side of the building. So if they're running around the side of the building to the back of the building, they don't have any cars in their way as they're trying to get through. It's difficult sometimes to tell your homeowners not to park there because they see that space and they think they can park there, but the fire marshal does not want that.
What if building 12 was split up to building 13 and there was, the stormwater was just a simple, a single pond in the center rather than split into two as it is? Wouldn't that?
The main reason we did that was for parking. To address Tom's point, which is a decent one, there'll be a strain, which is really why we decided between in that main drive between kind of buildings 1 and 6, 2 and 7.
Preston, we've lost you.
We're having trouble hearing you, Preston.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I was saying that in the main drive aisle between the bulk of the buildings, that's why we need to dedicate one spot per unit, because all those spots are going to be taken. And we want to make sure that people have at least one convenient spot. But the answer to the question about why we couldn't move building 12 to building, the short answer is we can. But the reason was we were trying to spread out parking in that area. The other thing is we took note of where there's actually houses in Henlopen Acres. in Henlopen Gardens, and wanted to kind of keep some ponds behind where there's actually homes in that area.
Could some of the like visitor parking go onto the continuing care facility site? Could there be an agreement?
It could, not per code, but so the senior living facility in all likelihood will be built and open before we finish the first building in Dutchman, assuming we get revised site plan approval.
We can't hear you.
You can't hear me again?
Yeah, you're fading in and out, Preston, unfortunately.
All right, let me see if I can move my computer and see if that helps. Can you hear me?
Wait.
Drew, can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes.
just, yeah.
Better.
I'm just gonna sit here and hold my computer for a second. Where was I?
Shared
was the
parking on the assisted
Oh,
living
yeah.
site.
So the idea, because if you got, now, some of you were in the planning commission when we got, most of you actually were, when we got the senior living facility approved, there was consensus amongst both the council and the planning commission that we had too many parking spots for the senior living facility. Relative to code, we have far more than code requires, but code was written for nursing homes. And a lot of new codes do not fully account for this type of senior housing, which is more likely to require parking, particularly for the coming and going of the employees that work there. But that's a long way of saying those spots that are right against the senior living building that you can see there, closest to this project, those are probably the last spots that employees or residents will park in. No, actually to the right of that, they're dotted. So what you were just on, Janelle, was actually spots that's part of the Dutchman Harvest. Yeah, those spots. If we see that those aren't being used, we don't think we have enough parking spots at Dutchman's Harvest, we're going to approach the senior living facility and do a shared parking easement for those spots only. But that's like 40 spots or so. So that's a decent number of extra parking spaces.
Right.
Can you still hear me?
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Bonnie, did you have some questions?
Yeah, I had a question. Let me turn this back on. I had two questions. The first is in the revised staff report, and maybe this is explained and I just missed it. In the table at the top of page 3, where it says square feet per dwelling, and the first column, which is the required column, and then the provided in the previous, it's NA. Does the change in design change that at all in terms of what's required? I found it a little hard to follow that.
The change does not impact that.
Okay, so there's no required minimum square foot per dwelling.
Not that I have been able to find, but if it comes up, we will make sure they comply with it.
Preston, out of curiosity, what is the smallest, the square footage of the smallest dwelling?
Let me pull that up. Hold on a sec. $790 heated square feet for the 1-bedroom units.
Okay.
So 948 square feet total. I don't know where that other square footage comes from, but
do these units have sometimes units like this have a storage area where people have a locker? Is there anything like that in this development?
yeah, there is, because and I don't know if we can share my screen, I can pull up the concept plan.
Okay.
Let me see if I can request it. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Yeah.
So,
is it something you already sent me?
yeah, it's that floor plan of the stacked townhome building, the one that had 6 units, even though this building will only have 5 per floor. It's on your website, you know. It's
Yeah,
like
it was part of the packet.
Yeah, it's the last page of the packet.
Okay. And my only other question is, with this.
Well, hold on, I didn't even answer that one yet.
Okay, go ahead.
So in the building we were looking at in Easton, Maryland, called Galloway Meadows, that we kind of modeled this after, it had a laundry room, and there were no in-unit laundry facilities, no washers and dryers. We thought that was unacceptable, and so we added those. And now we have each unit has kind of like a utility / laundry room, which can also serve as storage. So there's not a ton of storage, but there's a heck of a lot more than there would have been had we not added these laundry rooms.
And is this when you look at entering, where if you take the unit on the furthest on the left, when you enter the second door over from the left, there seems to be a little locker there. Is that a storage?
That's coat closet.
I see.
Which begs the question is why the ground floor unit doesn't have a coat closet, but you know, maybe they can, we can add one right behind that possibly for the ground floor unit.
Preston?
Yes,
Possible of getting storage space under the stairs that are going up for the ground floor people?
that's a good idea.
Yeah. Each,
And we probably would have done that. Remember, this is I spent $200,000 already on that big house design,
wow.
which now I can't really use. And so I was very trigger shy to spend too much money on this architecture until I knew that it worked on the site and we got the site approved. So really this and the aerial photograph you see of Galloway Meadows
Okay.
is kind of all I have at this stage.
Okay. Yeah, but there's storage opportunities for the first floor under the stairway.
I agree. Good idea.
If I can go back to Bonnie's question.
Just a minute. Bonnie was asking questions. Let's see if she can finish.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, did you want, no, go ahead, Tom. If you were talking to me, Drew, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was going to go back to the question you asked, which is about square foot per dwelling. I'm confused because when I look at the code for multifamily housing, it says square foot per dwelling unit is 1250. So I'm not sure why it's NA. What am I missing in the code, Janelle?
So again, this is attached dwellings, and this is how it was reviewed and approved the last time. So if I'm missing something, we will make sure it complies. But as you previously approved it, there was no square footage requirement.
Yeah,
And as approved by council, there was no square footage requirement.
Well, that was
I-
probably.
Just to add on to that, when I believe, and I need to look at the code to be for sure, but my recollection is that the primary difference between attached housing and multifamily is that multifamily each one does not have a door directly to the outside.
Correct.
I would like to ask how trash is going to be handled here.
There'll be dumpsters. I can't remember if we thought we were going to do individual totes for the big house or not.
We had actually planned on city pickup for that, so you're not going to be doing that anymore.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I don't think the city can handle dumpsters, can it, Anne Marie?
No, we can't handle dumpsters. So if it's dumpsters, it's definitely private. But
Yeah,
there's not there the way the layout has changed. It makes it, I think, very difficult to figure out how we would do the individual cans.
I mean, the only way we could do it is if we built little enclosures right next to the entrance to every unit, which I think would be, I don't know how you make that attractive, because there'd have to be there'll have to be 10 per building and have totes in there. But typically, we would always look to dumpsters for this type of development.
I don't see any
Where
dumpsters.
would the dumpsters be located?
Yeah, I don't know if Zach has located them yet. I see ample opportunity for him here.
He has
But I'm
not, and staff has asked that when we reviewed it as to where that location would be provided. And they are working on trying to figure that out, but I think Zach can answer that.
I wanted to go back to just the comments on the linearity and appreciating all of the work that has gone into this. When you look at it from above, it does look like straight rows of identical buildings. In the last plan, there were two different types of buildings, so there was a bit of variation in the building, and they were more clustered around. There was an additional road, for example, and it seemed to break things up more. Now, I didn't see anything in this on what the front elevation would look like. Looking at them, it appeared that they are all identical. Am I reading this correctly?
They're not, they're similar, but they're not all identical, because there's a mix of different unit types in each building. So there's two different, so we can get the right the targeted percentage of 1 bedrooms relative to 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, some of the buildings, and I think if you scroll in really close, it's labeled on each building, but some of them have 6 2-bedrooms in each building and some have 4.
Yeah, I noticed, I guess I was looking from the bird's eye view of just kind of where the doors were and how the doors were clustered and the distance between them. But so you're saying these buildings wouldn't all be identical?
No, I mean, yeah, I am saying that, but the differences are so minuscule that for purposes of their appearance, and the other thing we can do, if you guys want us to, we do it on a lot of our apartment buildings. We come up with 3 different color schemes, and we switch them up. You know, we don't have any buildings right next to other buildings with the exact same color scheme or directly across the street. So we can do that here. That'll help a little bit. But this is Galloway Meadows. This is the project that we modeled our buildings off after. And this is a 12-unit building, not a 10-unit building. So our building won't be quite as long. You can kind of cut off one of those units, and you can somewhat see where the unit changes are. There's 2 units in that middle part that has kind of the protruding entryway, and then there's 1 unit on either side of it. I think that's their 1-bedroom units, and then the 3-bedroom units are on the ends. But because the 1-bedroom unit isn't as deep, and the depth of the 3-bedroom unit is the deepest, and the 2-bedroom units in between, it kind of allows you, and ours will probably be even more defined than this, it allows you to jog the roof line and the elevation back a little bit as you go from unit to unit, which makes the elevation more attractive than if it was just a flat line.
Going for a second to parking, if I could. I know we covered that at the very beginning. But I know in the PLUS review, there were several comments from the Department of Transportation about parking, and especially about parking spaces being so close to corners, and concerns about having parking across from each other on a street where people back might have problems, especially during kind of the morning, commute or the evening return. And I can see how you've basically by staggering the buildings, then staggering where the blank spaces are for fire access. You've kind of tried to not have parking spaces directly across from each other, or not have all of them with a parking space across from it. But there is still the area that the Department of Transportation commented on in terms of, gosh, it's so small on the screen. Let me look at my things if I can explain exactly what I'm describing here. It's certainly, if you're entering on and take the first left, you have parking spaces just exactly at those corners. I guess part of this is a question for Janelle. I know that we have to have parking spaces back from a corner, and are we meeting all the requirements here? I guess the concern is a blind spot of people and pedestrians at those corners.
Again, what was originally reviewed as the PLUS process was a different layout than this was. And we will verify along with engineering and myself that everything complies with site distances and code requirements.
Yeah, I guess I was comparing the layout from the original to the current layout, and I really don't see any change in those parking spaces in terms of the positioning of them, so.
One of the items that we had discussed in the initial plan review was safe pedestrian and bike access through. And that was one of the recommendations, I believe, in our review comments. And I see that we have continuous sidewalks in front of the buildings with crosswalks that tie into the bike path. But there is no, any bicycle access will be through the back of the parking. And I see that as still being of a safety concern. Because the other design we had talked about in the spine in the center, that you could add a walkway through.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I don't think cars will be going that fast, or really shouldn't be, down these essentially parking aisles. So I don't think it's going to be all that unsafe for a biker, particularly on Road B, which is the lower road closest to Henlopen Gardens, to utilize the roadway. And in that particular case, he should be riding his bike, he or she, as close to Henlopen Gardens as possible. But from a strictly pedestrian standpoint, this project got a lot better, mainly due to the fact that we're not crossing driveways and garages anymore. Like, we have 3 different methods of walking virtually the entire length of the site without having to incur, cars backing out of their driveways.
We're very happy to see.
However, on a bicycle perspective, while the cars may not be driving fast, you've got a lot more cars backing out. And that's
True.
more of an issue than it is the speed of the cars.
Yeah, I mean, it's not ideal, but I can't think of a solution to that wouldn't disrupt the site plan in a way that was worse than solving the bicycle safety issue.
Melanie, you had a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to say this is a far superior plan for the pedestrian than the previous one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Agree.
So, Preston, I have a couple questions. First of all, thank you for doing everything you're doing to try to meet the goals of the city. I know this is tough. I share some of the concerns that I think Nancy raised a few minutes ago in comparing this plan with the old plan. The linearity, as she described it, is a thing that really stands out looking in the plan view here that we have in the packet. And building on the transportation, sort of the traffic flow, I worry about how straight these streets are. I realize it's, given the space that we have, the shape of the site, we're kind of stuck with this, but maybe you need to remind me how it is that we're going to keep this from becoming another cut through from Savannah to Kings Highway for traffic that doesn't belong here. And then I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, my only response to that would be, the traffic's going to take.
Preston, we're losing you
Can't
again.
hear you.
Maybe if I turn off my video thing, it'll be better. Let me see if I can do that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So I think traffic's going to take whatever's the most convenient. And we're hopeful that there's enough kind of jogs as far as kind of hard right turns and 90-degree turns. You can't come straight through. You've got to do at least probably 2 or 3 at a minimum, like 90-degree turns in order to connect from Savannah Road to Kings Highway. And the other thing is what someone just brought up most recently is that relative to other cut-throughs, this one has more parking spaces along it. But the short answer is we can't prevent that. And I don't know how we would, other than making it a gated community, which I don't think makes a heck of a lot of sense. If people decide that this is the most convenient way to get from Kings Highway to Savannah Road, I'm not sure there's much we can do about that.
If I may, I work at the high school, so I drive through there a lot, and I take lunch out every now and then. Henlopen Gardens is a pretty big cut through as it is. So I think if, you already have people using that as a cut through. So you're just
Right.
providing another cut through. So if anything, we have 2 options now, and being interconnected is not a bad thing.
I agree.
I'm going to hear that. I just worry about the length of straight road. Yes, there will be parking spaces on both sides, but that's exactly what worries me, is all the people that could be coming and going in and out of these spaces along a very long, straight stretch of street. And depending on how many people are cutting through, it may be, I don't know. I just worry about that long straight length with all those things to complicate visibility, particularly. I have a couple of follow-up things having to do with the linearity, and that has to do with, I guess, the way you've got the topography drawn on this plan for the stormwater practices. Are these going to be wet? Are they going to be dry? What restrictions are there for example, children to be in and out of these things? I mean, there aren't going to be yards of, as far as I can tell. It just seems like what open space we're calling open space is largely stormwater management, if it's not parking spaces.
So if you go to the, I guess it's the colored rendering in your package, which from your website. In mine, it's page 8.
So what Janelle has on the screen?
I don't know. I got off of it to look at it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's what Janelle has on the screen. So unfortunately for us, a dry pond can handle a lot more.
We're losing you again, Preston.
A dry pond, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
A dry pond can handle a lot more infiltration than a wet pond. And because infiltration was our biggest obstacle that was the impetus for this change to the site plan. And we had to locate an enormous dry pond at the low point of our site, which is that one you see right when you enter the property off Savannah Road. And it would be better for us and a better stormwater management, a better project from a strictly stormwater management perspective if all the ponds were dry. But we didn't want, if we didn't have to do that, and according to Zach and his engineering, we don't have to do it, we wanted to still at least have wet ponds that were visible from the Henlopen Garden side, where we had them before. So that's the reason that we made, that's really one pond, just with 2 wet components, that big, long, skinny thing in between, like in the center of the property. That's one pond, but with 2 areas that are lined with fountains in them, and largely so we could honor kind of what we were trying to do with the old site plan from the perspective of Henlopen Gardens.
I think the layout, I mean, I hear what you're saying about trying to reduce the we'll say the massing of buildings from the Henlopen Garden side. I mean, yes, there won't be things right there by the Henlopen Garden side, but we've been referring to this linearity. I mean, there's going to be a wall of buildings.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it would be better. It would be better if we took building 6. Is that 6? 8? Building 8, brought it over to the same side of the street as buildings 11, 12, and 13, and then did one central cut-through pond that basically went from one parking area and drive aisle to the other. That would kind of be right where buildings 12 and building 8 are right now. So we had 4 buildings on either side, as opposed to 5 buildings on one side and 3 buildings on the other. From a parking standpoint and a design standpoint, if you were ignoring the interests, which, and it's not entirely ignoring because you still have one wet pond that's visible from there, of Henlopen Gardens, that would have been the better plan. And I'm open to that. It's, you know, it's just sometimes it's a tightrope to decide how much you should do with your site plan to accommodate the representations you've made to your neighbors, particularly if you're changing your site plan, and how much you should do to accommodate the future interests of your homeowners within that new development.
Last question, thank you. And actually one point about that, I'm assuming that there will be some public hearing of some sort so that we can, I mean, this looks different enough. I think we need to hear from the public. The question about things like air conditioning, you know, where will all those kinds of things go? Where will, you know, central air type stuff go?
Around the perimeter of the building. And they'll be masked with landscaping. You don't see that now, but we'll locate those usually on the sides of the building, except the central units might be at the back. And you know, that's kind of a latter phase of design, but that's generally where they are. And then we put landscaping around it so you can't really see them.
Okay, so, okay, thank you.
If I can ask a couple more questions, you know, the photograph you showed of the project from Maryland, you know, one of the differences between that and this is that it had open space. Here, the open space, as has been pointed out by others, is really all stormwater management ponds. As far as I can tell, there's no deck or back porch area off of any of these units.
There is. That's what the little white areas are that you see on the building plans.
What's the size of that?
It's about, it depends, we might alter it, but I think it's either 4 or 5 feet by 8 to 10 feet. But we may make it bigger on those interior. The only buildings, because of the increased side yard setback now, that we don't think we can make it bigger for are buildings 1 through 5.
So these are essentially basically.
There are patios on the ground floor and decks on the second floor.
And the buildings are spaced at, you know, 20 feet plus whatever, just a little bit, which is the minimum code requirement. So if you start putting air conditioning units on the side of them, there's really not, I mean, there's not going to be a lot of green on this property other than the stormwater management pond. That's a statement. The other question is that one of the conditions in the original application or the original review was to have the byways input. Have the byways chimed in at all on the Savannah frontage portion?
We met with them on the Kings Highway frontage for the senior living, and we got landscape planting guidance from them on the entire community, both Dutchman's Harvest and senior living. And we will meet with them once we have a better idea if we've got a concept plan that can get approved. We have ample space and on Savannah Road to accommodate their interests, particularly with the fact now we really only have the side of one building up against Savannah Road as opposed to the earlier plan, which I think either had 3 or 2 at least. So short answer is we don't have specific guidance from them on that frontage yet, but we've been in contact with them and are happy to reach out to them and will when it gets to that point.
Because it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of land there. I mean, the pin oaks are great because they provide height, but as far as actually making a green space on Savannah, it doesn't look like there's a lot of room there in the point where the stormwater management pond is.
Yeah, I mean, there's not. I mean, the reality is, guys, we designed this to be a workforce housing project to get as many units as possible on these 8.5 acres. If the guidance is, we don't really want you to do that, and if we're not meeting your code in some respect, let me know and we'll alter it, but it will not, it'll get less and less affordable the more changes we make to provide more green space or open space than is required by code.
So along those lines, can I ask you about what Diamond State has said? So you've reduced the price point down to 150 to 200,000. What does Diamond State consider to be a tipping point?
I mean, what a tipping point for where they can raise additional money to lower the prices more?
Well, no, where it becomes not feasible. I mean, because you said that the 207 to 285.
They haven't given me exact guidance other than she was very distant, Helen, on the old plan, and seemed to be, when she reached out to a lot of her financing sources, that she was hopeful would help provide money to allow her to lower the units by more. She said, look, you just don't qualify. Your units are too expensive to begin with. They don't care that you have nice garages and nice architecture and that you're in Lewes. They drop it into kind of a spreadsheet, and it spits out a number at the end, and the number it's spitting out doesn't qualify. And so we're getting rejected left and right. She is very hopeful. I was going to say confident, but I think that might be too strong of a word. That with these revised pricing, she can participate and she can get outside parties interested in helping her lower the prices more. But the good news is the prices I'm selling her at direct cost are already affordable to people making 80% of area median income or less. So her objective, which is what she committed to kind of what she was going to try to do with her units initially. So now any additional money she can get, she's just going to be able to offer them even more affordably and possibly drop down her AMI target to maybe 70%. Sorry, did you lose me again?
No, we heard
Yeah,
you.
we got you.
Loud and clear. Thank you, Preston. Any other questions for the moment?
While we're on the landscape plan, I would sure like to see some shade trees used to shade the units. Shade trees can have significant savings on energy because they provide shade in the summertime. So I would love to see some shade trees on the south sides of these buildings.
I think we can do that.
And then I wonder if the dry ponds are going to be planted.
That's a good question.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
Zach.
Yeah. What we'll
Zach,
do
can
is
you
the same
introduce
thing.
yourself, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Zach Crouch with Davis Bowen and Friedel. Yes, the dry ponds there'll be some type of plantings that will be installed in those. And there again, we'll work with SCD for the particular plantings for that. But they always like to see some type of plantings in the dry areas because it does a number of different things. So
Good. Okay.
they will be planted.
All right, any, John Nearboss, James Nearboss, or Bob Heffernan, do you have any questions?
I think my biggest concerns was the parking, which I know we've kind of already talked to at length. I was curious about trash removal. I think dumpster might be the way to go on a project like that. I was also curious about the bus stop, getting that put in. And I know that's outside of us, but I think that would be a good thing to have there. And then, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I can kind of address both of those. As far as DART, when we go through, as maybe some of y'all may know, Savannah, DelDOT's doing a project along Savannah. We're in close contact with them, and a part of that project is a bus stop in this area. So, once we move this project forward, and through the DelDOT approval process, we'll locate that based on their requirements, and there will be a bus stop in that location. So we've already been in contact with them, so I don't see that being an issue.
Cool.
And as far as the trash, and I think Anne Marie hit the nail on the head. I mean, the last time we met, we were going to do trash service through the city, and now since the units have changed, we are going to have to do some dumpsters, and we're going to have to kind of look at some areas and see exactly the size and dimensions of the private trash folks that are going to be, picking up the dumpsters to make sure that we tuck them in where we can. But yes, I mean, that's, Janelle has mentioned it, and, I was under impression we were still going with the city, but after the fact that, there's no garages, we're going to have to do some type of dumpsters. But there are some areas that can accommodate it, and they will be screened per your code. So I don't see that being an issue.
Awesome, thanks. And I think my last question is more of a personal preference thing. Do the ponds have to be square? The water retention ponds have to be that square? I get you're trying to fit the capacity.
Yeah, and that's there again, that's a slippery slope because
stormwater's been an issue with the site. I mean, there's no hiding it. When you have the Warrington and you have you got the assistant living, and then you had the other project on the other side of Kings Highway. I mean, you get more capacity when you do square. That's the nature of the beast. And they're, again, trying to utilize as much as possible. I understand. I mean, and that's how come we tried to at least keep, the two in between the units wet with the fountain. So at least it's, you're not looking at just a mud puddle, I guess, if you want to say.
Yeah, keep in mind, when you're looking at a site plan kind of overhead like we are now, things look far more geometrical and linear than they do when you're actually driving the site from ground level, particularly from the stormwater ponds. With the plantings that will be around the buildings and the fountains in the ponds, yes, if you walked up to them, kind of walked all around them, you'd say, hey, these are pretty square, but it won't look as square, if you will, as it does right now staring at the site plan.
Thank you.
Bob Heffernan, do you have any questions?
I'm generally okay, but how deep is the water table here?
The water table is actually pretty deep. It's unfortunately, it's the soils that, when you run your infiltration test, that provide your rates, and there is some clay material in these areas. But I can, our last submission, we did submit the geotech report, but I mean, it's, 10 feet, the water table. So, I mean, it's not even close. And that's how come we're able to do dry ponds. And and get the most out of these ponds. And just like Preston mentioned, I mean, the wet ponds will have to be lined because of the water table is so deep.
Are you connecting those ponds?
Yes.
Okay.
They'll all be interconnected, and they're actually interconnected to the senior living facility too. So that way everything works together.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Bonnie, do you have any other questions at this time?
No, I mean, I did, I guess I do have sort of a question. Is this, Preston, is this development, is it going to look like or be harmonious with the Henlopen Gardens layout? I mean, I know there's that row of trees, but I assume it's going to be harmonious with that development in its architecture.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still going to try to go for what I call the coastal modern farmhouse look, which is the same look on the elevation that we did with the big house.
Okay.
So in that respect, it'll look a little bit different than that Galloway Meadows project. Unless if we try to go different colors, but you can't really go anything other than white when you go for the look I'm just talking about. So
okay.
Having said that, if we think it's going to be a sea of all the same buildings, particularly in that upper center cut through, we may pick 3 or 4 different color schemes for the buildings, and then we'll kind of have to get a little bit away from that coastal farmhouse, modern farmhouse look.
Okay. The other thing I noticed is in the rendering of the development that you used as a model, it looked like, maybe I'm wrong, but it looked like they had a sort of community center and jungle gym area, which...
That's a leasing office.
Oh, that's a leasing office?
I mean, that is a tot lot, you're right. But this is a for lease project, and so that's predominantly a leasing office.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Yep.
Right. Yes, Sumner.
So several points this evening. I think both Preston and Zach have mentioned the Warrington property. How much of a difference does the Warrington property make on the stormwater demand here?
Zach?
Well, the short version is there's 30 acres coming over to the site. And unfortunately for Preston, he has to be able to manage that or volume wise, and which is the reason why we got that big pond down at the entrance. I mean, so this, we got 30 acres coming from the Warrenton that flows there naturally as of right now. I mean, it goes down to the low point, which you cross the Savannah. There's one pipe that crosses Savannah that goes across, that goes, to the other side of Savannah Road. So everything drains to that. So we have to be able to, there's 2 pipes and 2 catch basins that will drain that area, which basically does not tie into our site, stormwater management, but it goes to the pond for storage, which then again is released at a certain rate across Savannah. So if Warrenton was developed today, that would be great because we wouldn't have to worry about it. I mean, so we're
that brings up, like, I don't want to shoot myself in the foot accidentally here, but that brings up an alternative here. We do have an alternative of simply putting this property on ice for 5 years, waiting for Warrenton to develop, which I know they're in discussions, but they've been in discussions off and on. Sorry, my wife is having an event right now, right as I'm trying to be on this call. But for the last 15 to 20 years. So if we let Louder Mitchell Farm continue to develop and let Warrenton continue to develop, they will have to account for their stormwater on their property at that time. They can still use our outfall. We can't prevent them from using our outfall, and really shouldn't for the sake of everybody that lives in this area. But we don't have to account for their stormwater in our ponds anymore. And we could broaden out the site a little bit, utilize that space. I still think we're going to need some form of a pond where Stormwater Facility 1 is, but it won't have to be nearly that big. So that is an alternative, but I told Zach that I don't think the city of Lewes, and even I wasn't that interested in waiting. So I said, look, we got to try to find something that works that we can develop in the near term so we don't have to put this property on ice for an indefinite period of time.
Preston, thank you. That was exactly why I asked that question.
Yeah, and that's an option. Like, we're not, from a strictly profit standpoint, I'm not all that excited to build this. So if the city decided, hey, look, we like that option, put it on ice until those other developments are built. I don't know if I'd want to leave myself open to zoning code changes and regulatory changes. So we'd want to get a site plan approved, but then we could put that approved site plan on the shelf. And granted, we'd have to get it approved, making assumptions about that water coming off the site. But that's an idea, and that's an option.
Any other questions for Preston or Zach? Preston, are there any other comments you'd like to offer at this time?
No, I think that's really it.
I have a clarification on the 1,250 square feet.
Go ahead.
That's not for the size of the unit itself. It would be, say, if it was a fee simple lot, that would be the minimum lot size, not the dwelling unit itself. So that square footage has nothing to do with the size of the dwelling unit.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, we've had a lot of questions come up tonight. I first of all want to thank Preston for his diligence and continued efforts to make something possible. And I appreciate Diamond State stepping up to help in this process. There are a few more steps we have to go through, but regardless of the outcome, Preston, I personally want to thank you for continuing to try and accommodate the city and our workforce. This is not affordable housing, this is workforce housing. And I think that's a commendable goal for the city and for you as a developer to step up and do this. I really appreciate your trying to make this happen. And we'll see what recommendations the commission makes down the road. To my fellow commissioners, I've offered you a couple of emails to suggest when we might have a hearing on this matter. And I'm just going to ask for a showing of hands. We had a couple of people who said they couldn't come on the 17th. which is the day before our next meeting. Is it possible we could meet at 5 o'clock on the 18th, an hour before normal starting time for regular meeting, to have a public hearing? Does that not work for somebody? Mr. School Teacher, it doesn't work for you.
I think
You're
he's
muted.
giving a
Good.
thumbs up that it's
You
good.
said, does that work for you? Thumbs
okay.
up, positive,
All right.
affirmative.
I was trying to get the opposite, but I apologize.
I
Is there anybody that it doesn't work for? 5
Long
o'clock
night.
on the 18th. Hearing none. Janelle, let's book a public hearing on this matter for 5 o'clock on the 18th of November, to be immediately followed by our monthly regularly scheduled meeting. In the meantime, if there are questions that you want further information on, please send them to Janelle, who will communicate to Preston and Zach. We'll get them on the website, and we'll try and keep the information flow active and up to date. But please don't wait until the 18th or any other date to get your questions answered. Janelle, also in the announcement of the public hearing, we'll keep the public record open until the close of November, close of business November 30th, or whatever the last work day is. I don't have my calendar in front of me, but we want to have the extra time after the public hearing. So that would be the 30th, which is a Monday. COB Monday would be the close of the public comment period. Sumner, did you want to add something? You're muted. You're muted.
Sumner, you're muted.
Okay, sorry, I have too many things going on my screen, sorry. Just having been involved with these Zoom things in a bunch of different capacities, I'm sorry, I'm sort of speaking off the top of my head here. Is there value in having the materials, get a little more of a front treatment, a little more time up front for people to review before a public hearing, so that they can come as well prepared as they can? I mean, these Zoom public hearings are difficult.
Absolutely.
So I think we should be inviting and encouraging people to provide written comments wherever possible, and give them a chance on the hearing to be able to explain what they've written, but that may require people to have more time, that's all.
Well, I think we're giving them now almost a month to get us any, if they want to give us comments, we'll certainly take them from now through the end of November. But I think we need to put some stakes in the ground to try and get people to step forward and make their comments, so we can consider them as we do. And whether or not we put this on the agenda for the 18th, it may be a placeholder based on the open comment period until the end of the month, but it'll certainly be back on our agenda in December, on the Planning Commission's regular monthly meeting in December. And Preston, as you continue to noodle or think about some of the questions tonight, we invite you to submit any additional information that you or Zach produces. And we're not holding you to anything in particular, but you may come up with some other ideas post reflection on our meeting tonight. And we again appreciate all your efforts to try and accommodate the Lewes comp plan goal of having some affordable workplace housing.
No problem. I mean, at a minimum, we're going to add shade trees to the south part of the buildings, and we're going to locate the dumpsters.
Great. As soon as you get that done, we'll have Janelle post it on the website, so we have the most current information available for the comments that hopefully the public will make, and any other comments or analysis that the commission wants. Anne Marie, did you have any other thoughts or questions before we move on to another item in the agenda?
I just have a small question. With the trash service being private, will there still be recycling?
That is a good question.
Staff asked that question.
A lot of our projects have two side-by-side dumpsters. One is for trash and one is for recycling. But if I was a betting man, I don't know that recycling actually makes it to a recycling center. I think it gets too intermixed, but we can do side by side and do both.
Okay, thank you, Preston.
Just one more thing. I think it would be good if we got input from the byways before the public hearing on the 18th.
All right, I'll reach out to them.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, moving on then to new business, the presentation discussion of the Sea Level Rise documents that were attached to the agenda item. And I assume, Tom Panetta, you're going to lead this discussion?
Well, I was going to let Janelle start out with the presentation she gave, and then I was going to pick it up from there.
All right.
So Janelle put the presentation together.
Please, Janelle.
Janelle, you're muted.
Yep, just give me a minute. I'm trying to get it
Okay.
open.
I guess maybe while she's opening up, let me just start it with, we've broken the resiliency or the sea level rise into three sections with a potential fourth of infrastructure, redevelopment, new subdivisions, and then whatever we need to capture further on down the line. And we've, based upon that, we'll let Janelle go through her presentation here. What we're looking for is a sense of the commission on the work that we've done so far before we finalize the first two sections, infrastructure and redevelopment, and really start going after the hard portion, which is new development. So at that point, I'll turn it over to Janelle here, let her go through our presentation, and then we can go from there.
Thanks. So this all started back in 2016 when council passed a motion regarding sea level rise. What they wanted to look at was the intermediate sea level rise. It was the blue line. Just for everybody's reference, the blue line is no longer the intermediate stream, intermediate line. It keeps changing colors. So thankfully they mentioned the intermediate line. So that's what we've been using. And to look out, projects 25 and 40 years when they're in the 40 years in development, and ones that are in the floodplain elevations.
So if I can just interject, Janelle, maybe we can do this as tag team. So just so everyone understands, the intermediate line is a 50-50 probability line. So it's based upon the best science available now, that there's a 50% chance that sea level rise will be greater than it, or a 50% chance that it'll be less than it. That's how that line was developed. Okay.
So the purpose of what we've been working on, and this is proposed in the ordinance, is to, and again, we are tag teaming on, we're not calling the ordinance sea level rise, it's been called resiliency because we recognize the city is working on more resiliency projects. So we thought that would be a better project and allow for the ordinance to expand in the future to address further resiliency items. So everything kind of lived all in one location. So you didn't have, wetlands over here, sea level rise here, something else over there. It's all going to kind of live, anything doing with resiliency is going to live in one section of code, which they agreed made sense, because if you're looking for something on resiliency, it's all going to be one location. So the purpose is to allow the city to promote adaptability, resiliency, as well as the ability to recover and endure from the impacts of climate change and environmental changes. And we thought that covered pretty much everything, the sea level rise is impacting other things that could be addressed with resiliency. And what we've been doing, we've reached out with Sea Grant, DENREC, their Division of Sustainability and Climate Change. They provide us a lot of information, including the most relevant data, which is the Delaware Sea Level Rise Technical Committee. They go through every couple of years, look at the most recent sea level rise projections, and as part of the committee, they decided they'll use that line as the intermediate line from those projections as the line that would be used from, if adopted, as going forward. So as that line changes, they would have to comply with the most up-to-date current line. So we wouldn't be addressing a specific number. we would just going whatever that year is. So like 2050, it says it's at 1 meter. But you know, in the next one, it says it's at 1.2 meters. So in the future, today you'd comply with a 1 meter, but in the future, with the new data, you'd comply with a 1.2 meter. So it's providing set to allow for that change as we get more data available. And as Tom said, focus on 3 categories: critical facilities, infrastructure, city facilities, redevelopment. And really what that was looking at was reducing lot coverage, requiring best management practices. We even came up with some design standards for those best management practices, and new development, which is coming soon. They wanted to get through the first 2, make sure everybody was comfortable with the projects and the focus that they're addressing. So this is, and Bob gave some additional advice as to turning the meters, because when sea level rise is done, it's typically done in meters. He provided the information in inches as well. And you can see the green line. This is from the 2017 technical report. The intermediate line is now green, but it also shows, you know, from what it was in 2000 projecting out to 2100. So back with that motion back in 2016, the council decided to use the intermediate line, because you think of it as a low, medium, and extreme relation to sea level rise. So what we did was we took, we've been focusing on working on projections based on the intermediate line, the green line, and if you're going to build certain things, you'll have to comply with whatever that looks at different time points. So for certain things, we're looking, you know, 50 years out. Some things we're looking 70 years out. So whatever that line is, it matches, you know, like if we're looking at, you know, we're getting near like the one meter line at 2100, and we said, okay, you have to comply with the year 2100 and that line, you'd be building be dealing with the 1 meter. I also.
One second, if we could just stay on that chart there one second. So when City Council first addressed this, the report that they were using at that point was the 2009 technical report. The 2017 came out subsequently, and this gets updated on a regular basis. And just to state the obvious, every one that has come out, the numbers go up. They've never gone down. So this is the best science that's available at the time, but it is by no means conservative. If anything, we see things accelerating.
And I think that's also kind of goes back to why written to the code is to use the most relevant, the most recent technical report, because we recognize this line keeps changing and it keeps going up. So we want to make sure we're reflecting those changes. So we're not stuck with one line as of today. So if we reference the 2017 report, and in 2020 we get a new report, or 2022 we get a new report, we can use that 2022 report for that line for development.
Yeah, and so one of the things we want feedback from the rest of the commission on is, you know, we spent a lot of time discussing what time frames we should be using, because while what Janelle said is absolutely true, as the new curves come out, they will become incorporated into the code. The concern is that when you build a building, the lifespan of a house is by AIA is about 100 years. So when you put something in the ground, it is there for 100 years. I mean, as living in Lewes, we all know, most of our houses are more than 100 years old. So we want to make sure that whatever we're putting in the ground is going to be livable for the foreseeable future. But countering that with, if we go out to 100 years out, we can't accommodate building things a meter above the current ground. I mean, Lewes is basically not inhabitable at that point. So one of the things we're going to want, would like to have some feedback on is, are the timeframes we're looking at something that you will feel comfortable with, or should we be going more or less?
And just remember, we haven't gotten into new development yet because we know that's going to be a big discussion item. So we just focused on critical facilities. So if we're going to build a new city hall, if it's going to be impacted by sea level rise, what should it look like? Or if you're going to redevelop a house that exists, what should it look like? So what I did is I took the state data. This is the floodplain information.
Before you go on to the next slide, Tom, I understand the question of kind of what time frame should we be looking at, but is there also a question of which line should we be using? Because I mean, if you take a longer time frame, it pushes you up. If you choose a different line or halfway between, the intermediate and between the green and the red, I can't remember what color it was. Could you go one slide forward?
Yeah, I'm just gonna. The motion from council was to use the intermediate sea level rise. So that's why they focused on that. But Tom, go ahead and answer. Go ahead and provide additional information.
I mean, recognizing that was a resolution by the council, there was no ordinance associated with it. And it was 4 years ago and time has moved on. But in answer to your question, the two are actually interrelated. I mean, you can either go to a longer time frame or you can go to a higher probability curve or a combination of them. They get you to the same point.
It all comes down to accept how much risk you want to accommodate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And don't forget, if you're in the floodplain, you still have freeboard to comply with. Because I think we got to one discussion at certain points, if you have to build the house at a meter plus the 18 inches of freeboard, you're well over 4 feet of being above your base flood elevation. So I just kind of did just general information. This is the floodplain map. You can see the blue is the floodplain, the yellow is the 500 year, and then you can kind of see the VE in the crosshatch out near the sea. And then you take the 5.5 meter sea level rise, because, and again, the colors came from the state. That darker blue is just a 0.5 meter. So we use these as when we were discussing what we wanted to look at, what should be impacted by sea level rise. And you can see the proposed sea level rise is following the floodplain. And this is the 0.5 meter. Again, that light blue is the floodplain. That yellow is the floodplain. And that darker blue is the 0.5 meter, the 0.5 meter sea level rise. This one's a little bit harder to see because of the shades of blue, but you can kind of see this shade of blue is the 1 meter sea level rise. It's still following the floodplain. Nothing at this point is going outside the floodplain. And even with, we get into the lighter color, that's the 1.5 meter sea level rise. So again, this would be the extreme event. It's all still following the floodplain. You can actually see it encroach maybe a little bit into the 500 year. So as proposed, every property impacted by the floodplain would have to comply with the sea level rise requirements. And as the floodplain changes, because the floodplain changes and as new maps are adopted, those properties that as it changes would also have to comply. So this is normally, like, your zoning codes are a set time and place. This one allows for that flexibility by using that intermediate line as proposed from the most recent technical data, and this one would be using the most recent floodplain information. So as the floodplains change, and again, we recognize them, and we discuss this a lot with a lot of scientists and others and engineers, that make the best sense is that we recognize if you're in the floodplain, you need to comply with sea level rise because that's where you're going to be hit the hardest. And that's what I had for just to kind of give you kind of an understanding of kind of what we looked at and where we're seeing based on that data from the state, based on those curves, where the sea level rise is looking to come. And right now it's following the line of the floodplain.
So, and Sumner had made this point very clearly during the meetings. One of the concerns is, Janelle, maybe if you could put back up the half-meter floodplain map. One of the concerns is what area of the city would this sea level rise apply to? And with the lower level sea level rise is like a half a meter, it all falls within the current floodplain. So by limiting the scope to the floodplain and making sea level rise have to be accommodated for any building in the floodplain covers us. Obviously, as you get to higher levels of sea level rise, it starts to spill outside of the floodplain. And those areas would not be currently covered by the current proposed language. But unless we developed our own set of mapping to deal with those outside areas, we didn't find a way to accommodate them. So we thought as a first step, the half-meter floodplain would be, and just limiting it to the zoning of the floodplain would get us started. And down the line, as we get more intelligent, we could address if we wanted to do more. And Sumner, if you want to chime in, because I know you felt strongly about this.
Having spent a bunch of time playing with maps on my own, and having spent a fair amount of time looking at the dynamic nature of water coming and going twice a day and all the things that change the levels over the course of a month or a year based on lunar cycles and storms and so on, I think it's super important for us to keep in mind that these maps that we're looking at right now are basically showing averages. They're showing perhaps where sea level rise, where sea level may be, what will be wet, maybe at least once a day. But we all know, as just a couple of weeks ago, we had, a couple of days of northeast winds of a certain strength. And even on a sunny day, we had some really high water. And so there are a lot of factors that will bring the water up and down from these sort of benchmarks, if you will. And, I think it's important that we keep in mind that, whatever predictions there are for sea level rise at some point in the future, based on those pretty lines we had on the graph, there will always be times during the year and the years moving forward when those levels will be exceeded, perhaps by several feet, or perhaps as much as a meter. I draw your attention to what happened in Winter Storm Jonas. That was a storm where the mean high water level, which is what those blue levels represent, the high tide mark, the level that was reached in January 23rd, 2016 was 4.7 feet above high tide mark, at least according to what is measured out at the Cape May Lewes ferry dock. Which brings me to another point that, I'm just going to throw out here. I think in order for us all to better understand moving forward what levels of water we're going to have, I think somehow either between, it's not really the Planning Commission's purview, but I hope that the city will make some effort to gather its own data regarding what happens inside of Roosevelt Inlet, because Roosevelt Inlet is a sort of a fluid dynamics problem that separates us from and exacerbates flooding problems. When the water is high out in Cape May Lewes Ferry, out in the Delaware Bay, it can get a lot worse inside of Roosevelt Inlet, back in the Great Marsh, up Canary Creek, up the canal.
So you're actually giving me a great time to plug the West Cedar Street flood mitigation planning study that we've got going on. Because
Well,
we are looking at that, because we do
Let me
recognize
suggest, though, that these maps are confusing.
Understand you have concerns, but the colors came from the state.
Well, I don't care where the colors came from. They need to be redone in some way that's where you can put a key on them, because the only color that matters on there is tan. If you look back at them, there's a tendency to think that a lot of deep blue is deeper water. It's not necessarily in this case. It's shallow water. And so if we're going to present these again.
Oh, understood. Yeah, they need a little bit more work.
And for the audience, all those little questions on there were things, you know, I spent some time with these over the weekend trying to figure out what they were trying to tell me. And there are more questions on there than answers. So we need a set of maps that you can say, this is 1 meter and this is the keys to what blue, tan, green, and brown mean.
Understood. So I think what maybe you want to get to the council to understand it, or the commission to understand, is we make sure, I think this was the intent, was to see, are we on the right path for critical facilities and redevelopment? So what we did was, for redevelopment, if, again, this is tied into the floodplain section of the code, it's a subset of that called proposed to be called resiliency, that if you're going to redevelop, if you meet the definition of substantial damage or substantial improvement as defined for the code, you need to comply with the 50-year sea level rise projection in addition to the freeboard requirement as defined by the code. So currently, freeboard is 18 inches, and if you're looking at the 50-year, we're looking at 2070, and it was well over a ½ meter of sea level rise. So we were looking at multiple feet of having to rise the lot. We also recognized that there were flood-prone properties and that they maybe should not be developed. And we defined those as properties that meet the definition of substantial damage 2 or more times, which means you've rebuilt that house probably, or you've met the definition of substantial damage. You've had over 50% damage to that property multiple times, and maybe it's time not to rebuild that house. And we also looked at, because we recognized, well, this is sea level rise, we also have other factors coming in to play with the development. Maybe looking at lot coverage and requiring best management practices for runoff reduction, because we also recognize tides, groundwater rising, sea level rise. We've got a lot of things going on. So what they're proposing is limiting the lot coverage. Currently it's 60%. We're looking at, limiting it to 50%. However, you can increase that back to, you can get that 10% back, but you have to offset it by providing 3 best management practices from at least 2 different categories for runoff reduction practices. And a lot of them you actually have to offset. So it's like, oh, I'm gonna provide, I think we've had discussion about, like if somebody wanted to provide, where is it hiding on me? A planter box. Well, okay, you have to have some information behind that. You just can't go, oh, I'm putting like a 2x2 planter box and you're like, oh, that equals that. No, that 2x2 would equal a portion. So you still have to provide equaling whatever you're going to install has to equal that 10% that we would be getting back. So we looked at that, and we also recognized it has to be reviewed by the city engineer for compliance, that it's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. So items like rain gardens, tree boxes, And again, we recognize not all of these, and that's why we put up some design standards, which I want to say follow. Yes, they do. Good. Give a little bit more explanation and provide what the offset should be. So like, you know, the rain gardens, it'd be a 1-for-1 offset. And then, you know, a maximum, like, and we had a lot of discussion like on rain barrels. They're nice, we like them, but are they the best? And it's like, for some people, it really does function. But we'd have to, like, a minimum size, you know, a 1-for-1 offset, you know, and other items.
If I can jump in here a second.
Go for it.
So what we're trying to do here is say, we're reducing the pervious coverage from 60 to 50. And you can earn that 10% back, but you can earn it back only by a design that is equivalent to the amount of coverage that you're getting. So, for example, rain barrels, they're a feel-good thing. They're good because they reduce the amount of treated water that you're using. However, a 50-gallon rain barrel is equivalent to a 1-inch rainfall on an 80-square-foot roof. It really is not significant or substantial in providing any type of offset. So, you know, if you want to put a rain barrel in, great, but you're only going to get 80 square feet of equivalency out of it. And each one of these has a calculation associated with that. So, you know, if you put in pervious pavement, we would need to come up with the offset of how many square feet of pervious pavement, what does it perk based upon the ground. And it can't be just pervious pavement. It's got to be engineered pervious pavement. It's got to have a subbed that's capable of retaining the water until it can perk into the ground. So all of these are what we put into the design standards. And just going back to one other point is that while the main topic is sea level rise, in talking with DENREC, NOAA, and FEMA in preparing for the upcoming workshop, they really felt that you can't divorce sea level rise from other types of flooding like precipitation. So that's why you'll see the agenda for the upcoming workshop will actually have representatives from NOAA and DENREC climatology to discuss rainfall and how that is changing over time.
Tom, didn't you also say when you brought this up at one point that in talking with one of your experts, you also can't divorce the floodplain fill questions from a lot of the sea level rise stuff?
Yeah, yes. But since there's a separate fill group, eventually we're going to have to bring fill, wetland buffers, and sea level rise together and harmonize the ordinances. Right now we're running them independently, but because that's the most efficient way of getting things on the books. But down the line, we're going to have to harmonize all the ordinances that we're writing. And I commend Janelle. That's why we're creating this separate section called resiliency.
Yeah, because we recognize, you know, there's going to be a lot of stuff, and I'm trying to, as I'm working with the other subcommittees, trying to make sure all those items are going to work together. So while somebody might be working over here and over there, I'm kind of like, you know, making sure what's being done over here will work with, you know, what's being done in the sea level rise. So that's what we're looking at for redevelopment. For critical facilities, we're looking at existing roadways, designed to minimize flood damage. We're looking at the 20-year sea level rise projection. And again, as Tom said, certain things are going to be, like houses are built to last longer. Typically, a road is designed to last a shorter time frame because we recognize, 10, 15 years, you redo a road, maybe it's just a top coat, etc. So we're looking at a shorter time frame because we recognize those. If, like, do we really want, to design and build a road, one for cost, two for functionality, for something that's 50 years out when we know it'll probably be redone at least twice, if not more than that, in that time frame? Well, recognizing that time can change.
If I can interject on the roadway. So GMB was an integral part of what we've done so far. And as they pointed out, if you tried to accommodate 50 years out with the roadway, the roads would not be accessible by most people's houses. And so longer term, we're going to have to address the bigger issues with the city of Lewes if these curves really do come to fruition. But roadways, as Janelle pointed out, do get rebuilt on a regular occurrences. And so we felt that going with a lower level for roads than other type of infrastructure, like if we needed to rebuild the wastewater treatment plant or put in an EOC that was going to be outside the floodplains.
And we also recognize—
I have a question about that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, this is Anne Marie. So my question is, the issue of roads get maintained every, 15, 20 years, but they're not structurally, I mean, we're trying at this point to make sure roads are built to a standard so that the maintenance can be, mill and overlay.
Right.
So my question is, if we're not building them to a elevation, are we putting ourselves in a situation where we're going to have a lot more structural road work to like lift roads, to elevate roads? Because some of the things that we see now, for instance, and I know they're not city streets, but Cedar and Savannah, where you've got flooding, I mean, really the solution is to elevate the road. But we know that's not going to happen because it's so expensive. So I'm worried that if we don't look at roads as a long-term infrastructure, then we're going to be putting ourselves in a position where we're stuck either having to rebuild or having to deal with roads that are underwater while the buildings around them are not.
You're absolutely right, Anne Marie, and that's that was one of the big things we debated, because obviously what you stated is correct. We're putting in subbeds that are meant to be able to just top coat or mill, but by the same token, if you put a road in that's a half a meter higher than everyone's driveway, that's not workable either at this point. So we're open to suggestions there, but I think that is something that, because they're city streets, we have a certain amount of control over what we do. If an area can support the road being higher, great. But if you're rebuilding, and not to pick on UK, but if we're rebuilding Coleman, raising Coleman up a half a meter is probably not doable.
Right,
Yeah,
but
well-
I'm thinking
well, and-
more in newer areas where, like, for instance, if somebody's building a subdivision, don't we want
absolutely.
that road at an elevation similar to how we don't right now? We're saying we don't allow the road to be below base flood elevation.
Yeah, this is
Absolutely.
for
And
existing
actually,
roads.
You're right, because in
I'm sorry.
we're going to handle
Okay,
that in
No,
the
that's okay.
subdivision ordinance.
Yeah,
Well, and it's really more of a storm issue, because the way our roads are now, you can be flooded in on sections of Lewes Beach. So you can evacuate now, or you're going to be driving your car through a lot of salt water. So that's more of a storm issue, I think, at the moment, not the sort of unstoppable rise.
Yeah, that's why it says
It's the
designed
tide
to
in addition to the
minimize.
storm.
Yeah, there are
Yeah.
a lot of factors
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
So we said to try to minimize, and we wanted to make sure that drainage is not adversely impacted, because sometimes it's like, okay, well, we can minimize the road, we're elevating it, but then we're gonna end up flooding somebody's property. So it's like trying to find that balance. We recognize there could be some difficulties where neither is possible. You know, you just have to do the road that is, but as long as we've looked at it and made that determination that it's like, okay, if we do something, we could actually make it worse right now. So then you find that balance to try to do what we could. And again, this is for existing roads. This is why we did it in sections, because we know new development, we expect we could require different items and get them to more comply, because it's easier to get a new road to comply than to retrofit an existing road with existing houses on the road.
Joe, did you have a question?
No,
Okay, I saw you raise your hand and I thought you were trying to get in.
I'm good.
So I think at this point, probably would be most beneficial to us is to have a sense of what the commission's questions are, things that they've seen and what's been written in the draft ordinance, and items that they think that we should work on.
Well, let me ask two questions, Tom. First is for Bonnie. Do you think we need to revisit sooner than later the resolution with the city council to either reaffirm it or to update it? Or should we continue to follow the original direction of the footage that was in the, 2016 resolution of the council?
I'm not aware of any movement within the council to change, sticking with the intermediate assumption. I mean, if you want us to put it on the next agenda, we certainly can. But I haven't heard anybody say we should go with the low, or anybody say we should go with the high.
Well, I simply wanted to make sure that we were in sync with council since the passage of time and new council members, but we'll defer to your judgment. If you think it needs to be revisited, we'll defer to your judgment, but I just want to make sure we accommodate that.
Well, I mean, I'll certainly ask, one person, because that's all I can ask. So I'll phone a friend. But I'm not aware, as I sit here right now, of any interest in changing that approach.
And somewhat following up on Bob's question about the mapping, Tom, how much do you think the experts that you're bringing in at the water workshop will contribute to the decision-making or recommendations here?
I think we've gotten their input for what we've done so far already. However, it's a public education, and I think that their input for the new development portion is going to be critical. Because that's where, I agree with Janelle, that's where we have more leeway on making sure that we're addressing things for the longer term. But going back to your first question, Drew, I guess I thought our charter at this point was, the city council made a resolution in 2016, 4 years have gone by since then, and that we were asked to provide input back to city council in the form of an ordinance using the best engineering judgment and science that we have today. So we have, altered from the timeframes that were in the original resolution. And, it's cities, I would like to bring our proposal to city council so we can have feedback from the whole council as to whether we're off base or not.
Are you planning to hold a public, city council is one thing, but there's obviously a lot of significant aspects to this proposal. Are you planning to have a public hearing on this?
I would think so, just like we did for wetland buffers and.
Okay, I mean, because it would obviously be of help just to hear what citizens have to say.
Oh, absolutely. Drew, I guess I don't want to speak out of school, but I assume that was the way this was going to go.
Yes, again, two things are going to follow. One, we're going to incorporate in the plan this effort to make sure that we have prioritized properly all the items that are outstanding from Janelle's list and otherwise. Number two, we're going to have the water workshop. And then I think we would be in a position to have a specific hearing on this outline, all three facets of this outline, probably sometime in January, depending on, how other things evolve. And we have some applications that are coming, so we have to factor that in. But all things considered, probably by January we'd be having a public hearing, and then be in the position a month later to make recommendations to Mayor and City Council. But that's also assuming, Bonnie, that Mayor and City Council have blessed our priority list and want us to move forward in the way that we're going to outline based on the various subject matters that we're dealing with.
Yeah, there's a lot coming. So how you guys sequence that is obviously up to you. But I do agree with what Tom was saying, that we need public input on this particular proposal.
Absolutely.
So, Drew, the one thing I would say, whether we bring all three or just the critical infrastructure and redevelopment to City Council, if the new development is going to take longer, I think is still an open question for us to decide.
Well, agreed. I think we have to come up with our prioritization of these items and decide which we want to move forward first, and whether new development's ready, or whether, because of what you said, the cross-fertilization between the other subcommittees and their subject area and resiliency in these other issues, whether we need to examine it in a slightly broader context, that's to be determined. But I do think Bonnie, just to reassure you, at every step along the way, when we're going to propose something new, we're going to have a public hearing.
That's great. I mean, I have to say, it's interesting, the idea of the interconnection between these various subcommittees and initiatives. I mean, one thing that was sort of going through my mind is, all right, if we do end up, how does a wetland buffer and sea level rise, how do they work together? So, for example, if you have, if the assumption is that sea level rise is going to lead to, to groundwater coming up, increasing of the wetland buffers, it will be interesting to see how all these things tie together. I mean, it's all about water, and under the ground, on top of the ground, and how all this works together for a coherent zoning code.
Councilperson Osler, I couldn't agree more with that. I think much of what we've been examining with sea level rise, I think the fundamental issue with that chart with all the pretty colors on it that we spent some time on earlier, it's not a question of if, it's a matter of when. We don't get to choose those lines. Those lines we inherit from the globe. So we have to figure out how to manage the water that's coming through all the methods, all of the avenues that you just mentioned. And it really is in our best interest to figure out how to keep all these pieces together, rather than to have a whole bunch of different pieces out there that don't work with each other.
Well, we have to convince the public that it's a good idea, that it's in everybody's best interest. It protects the land and it protects people.
Yeah.
That's the other component. If the public has to buy into this being the best plan.
Right, and that's why my personal preference is that I'd like to have the public hearing on the first two before we start developing or get the third one, subdivision, heavily invested in. Because what the public is going to say about our risk tolerance is going to greatly affect what we do in the subdevelopment. If the public feels that we're being too risk averse and that, we're just, property rights are the ultimate goal, or that we're not protecting the city enough is going to greatly influence what we do in subdevelopment or subdivisions. And I would also like to have the city council's input. That's why, in my mind, I personally would prefer that we bring critical infrastructure and redevelopment through the process and get the feedback from everyone there.
I think it makes
Bonnie,
good sense.
But Bonnie, I don't know how you feel about that.
I have to say, Tom, I didn't quite follow why you would want to hold off on one of the three areas you're looking at here. I mean, if it's all the same science, I'm a little at sea as to what the rationale is for holding off.
Well, I tend to be irrational, but that's besides the point. My thought process is that we don't know what the risk tolerance right now is for the public and city council. Because this is all about, I think as Sumner said, this is all about risk tolerance. And I would rather hear from the public if we're totally off base before we start getting into the real hard nuts of what we do for the new developments.
I would venture a guess based off our work with buffer zones that the people are very interested in us moving forward with something with this and protecting the assets we have. I think we've been met with some mostly positive, I believe, in our efforts thus far in our first committee.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I agree. I think the feedback we've gotten from the what we've done so far is that we're not going fast enough.
Right. I don't think we're too far off track so far, but definitely need some input from the public to see where we're at and, like you said, how much risk they're willing to accept. And
well, because
let me just suggest one thing here. I think you're going to get a whole range of public input about risk tolerance and about the degree to which people should be allowed to make their own decisions about the risks they want to take. I mean, that's just what I think is probably going to happen. But please remember that the wetlands buffers, at least so far, we're talking about, just talking about future major subdivisions. It will be a very interesting exercise to see when the discussion goes to people who are living in actual houses on actual lots, what kind of feedback one gets. I mean, that's where it's obviously much harder.
And I agree with you, Bonnie. That's my concern is that we're starting to tread into property rights issues here.
Yes, you are, and Mr. Mandalis, if you're awake over there. Glenn's input, as we discussed in connection with the buffer, the wetland buffer issues, we're going to need to take a look at not just where the science might take us, depending on the predictive value you want to choose, but what the city actually can do legally. It's a very complicated picture.
So
everybody knows that. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know.
One of the areas that we're going to have to discuss down the line, and it's out of the scope of this, but is forced retreat. And I think everyone's heard me on my soapbox about this, but when the son of Sandy comes and wipes out Lewes Beach, what is it that we're going to allow to be rebuilt at that point?
I don't know, but I don't think I'd call that retreat. I mean, retreat is a very specific meaning. What you're saying is, if a storm comes along and it wipes people out, and we think there will be another storm like it, what do we do?
Right.
And I don't know, but right now we're just talking about sea level rise, right? Not storm
Not
damage. So
storms. And I think that's the thing, because the maps we typically see are storm maps. So I think it's going to be important at the workshop, especially to keep saying this is sea level rise, not a single storm event. Because the other factor is going to be insurance. What's available, what happens to FEMA, and just how the insurance industry is affected by Australia burning down, the West Coast burning down. These are things that are going to affect us all at some point.
Well, and while you're right that a storm is a single event, the storms are exacerbated by sea level rise because our dune structure becomes less efficient.
I understand all that,
sea level
Tom.
rise.
All I'm trying to do is channel this back into the discussion that we're having, which is on the sea level rise document, and not, and all I was, you're absolutely right. And I made the same point that the wetlands buffers in this, they all do work together. But getting into whether or not someone will be able to, will be forbidden by the city of Lewes from rebuilding on a particular piece of property based on what criteria is, that's a whole other area of inquiry, if you ask me.
And I said that, but that's really where this chapter resiliency needs to go the next step. Because waiting till after the storm is not the time to do it.
No, I don't disagree with you, but I think we need to finish this step first.
Oh, absolutely.
So Bonnie, I'm curious, we have a bunch of I think before we would present this publicly, I think we have to do, sort of building on what Bob was getting at earlier, I think we have to do a better job of painting the picture. We have to do a better job of illustrating sort of what's coming, and sort of expand on sort of the range of situations where flooding will occur. Like listening to all this conversation, one of the terms that comes to mind is something called nuisance flooding. They aren't exactly storms. They're the kinds of things I was ranting about a few minutes ago. They're just, for whatever reason, the water is high. Sometimes they call it sunny day flooding. Well, the fact is that with sea level rise, as time goes by, the number of times in a given year when that might happen will increase. At what point does it become no longer just a nuisance, but something that really is an issue? When does it become, as Anne Marie was suggesting, something that starts to cost the city real money?
Sure.
Just to maintain the road?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I completely agree with you. But the reality of the public, where the public is right now, and to your point about painting the picture, is anyone who goes down on the beach, there are people investing millions of dollars down there in an area that your charts just showed, maybe that's not a very wise investment. So that gets to risk tolerant, and the only way to find out what the public thinks about it is to invite the public in. And I think the commission did a great job with the fora that it's put together so far. The attendance showed that people heard the message and they came to express themselves. Now, I mean, I will say, and I think everybody knows this, the last, the water workshops have been more theoretical to date. Now you're talking about bringing it down to the concrete situation in Lewes. And that will engender, I'm sure, a lot of discussion. I hope it does. It needs to.
Well, if we have a public hearing, we need to set expectations. We're just talking about, there's 3 pieces or 4 pieces. We're just talking about this little piece right now, redevelopment of existing. And so it's pretty easy to count when your house gets wiped out twice. On the other hand, there's another piece of that says, why would you let anybody build something where you're pretty sure that's going to happen? That's not part of what Tom's talking about right now, or planning on presenting.
Right.
But you're going to have to set expectations about, this is coming maybe at some point in time after it's studied more. this is the little piece we can address right now that has enough concrete in it, around it, that we can actually present and presumably put in the code.
And that's the difference between the public hearing, which is on a specific concrete proposal or proposed ordinance, and the next water workshop, which is more of an educational program on the state of the science today and where it's going.
Well, although a map is a very emotional thing when your house is on it and it's in the dark blue. So I think that's a component of it, is that it becomes very personal for people, because it's natural to look on these maps, or where's my house? So that's where you'll get the reaction from people, and they'll either be with you or against you, I think, at that moment. You know, it's like, well, what can I do? When is that happening? It's going to be what people think immediately. So I'm just saying,
I
past
completely agree,
experiences
Kay.
showed me. Pardon me?
I completely agree with that. And I'll have it as someone who's looked at these maps a million different ways, and I can put one up that puts parcels on the flood maps that Janelle was talking about earlier. It's a pretty.
Well, the first ones the first meetings that DENREC held at the high school, and people were in there sobbing because their house, in short order, you know, say in Prime Hook and places like that, was going to be basically without a road. And, you know, it's like, I put my life savings into that. And what am I going to do? I mean, that was very distressing, you know, as somebody who was just sort of walking around. So that's a real emotional jolt.
Nancy, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I can see a value in having it more focused, but I'm not sure that you're taking the temperature that will transfer over to views on new development. It's just, I think you have very different interest groups on each one. And, you know, as I talk to residents, I think a lot of people who currently own property and have houses are concerned about new development compromising their properties because of impacts that it has on flooding and as a result of sea level. I mean, go storm, flooding, you know, fill in the blank for any of these risks. But people who own property and haven't developed it yet also have their property rights. So I'm just not sure, Tom, that it's going to give the, you know, a sense of how you'd go on in each of these areas, the feedback you get from one. I think it does serve a real value, though, in terms of having multiple episodes when people are getting educated about the maps, about the risks, about, you know, about the science before looking at the policy.
I think you're right. And I think that the combination of the feedback between the public hearing on the ordinance, which does have to be focused, and the public input from the water workshop, which is the, oh my God, the world is coming to an end. Those combined with the other feedback that we've gotten on the wetlands buffer and the fill will give us a sense of the temperature.
Is it worth having, again, some clearer method for gathering public response outside of an actual meeting to these more general sort of educational events? You know, something that's not so discrete as a project or an ordinance, but, you know, as we're doing these workshops, as we're doing these educational things, giving an avenue for a forum for the public to be able to provide feedback and help guide our future work.
And how are you suggesting we should do that, Sumner?
I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what the mechanism is, but it just seems to me, you know, like having been through 2 of these water workshops, I really feel like there was a lot of enthusiasm in the meetings and after the meetings, talking with people on the street and so on. But I just wish there was a way to have more feedback And
How about
maybe it's a
article
matter
in
of
the
us
Gazette?
doing a better job of collecting it.
Melanie?
How about getting an article in the Cape Gazette? Maybe invite a reporter to interview the two of you, and Janelle.
Well, let me ask another question just momentarily, since we're talking a lot about it. Tom or Janelle, can you update us on the water workshop, what its status is, who's going to participate, and when you tentatively have it scheduled?
So we're looking at the first week in December, and I'm waiting for dates back. And it's going to have 3 different groups from DENREC, Coastal Group, Climatology, and MS4, which is the stormwater management portion. Sussex County Conservation District, Jessica Watson has agreed to talk. Sea Grant, Danielle, who's been an active participant in our group, and the American Flood Association, I think that's the right title, is going to work with Sea Grant, and NOAA to talk about Atlas 14. Atlas 14 is the precipitation forecasting. So it's what determines the 1, 25, 50, 100-year flood events. And it's quite out of date for our region. And then I think that's everyone.
How many days are you going to have to get all these people to talk?
Well, we're going to group them together, and we're going to give them like 10 minutes to give a presentation, and then hopefully I was thinking we'd have 2 hours for the workshop. And so between the group, like 10 minutes each, that would be like 60 minutes, and then that would allow us in between an hour for question and answers.
And just to clarify, the first week in September, the first full week, the 7th, or the week that begins Tuesday, the 1st?
The week that begins Tuesday, the 1st is what I'm shooting for.
Okay. Is it possible, in keeping with Sumner's question, to get material in advance from some of these groups that we could post on the website and invite comments on?
Yes, they're actually working on presentations right now. I haven't seen them yet, but I've talked to each one of the groups, and they've all got. I'd be glad to send to everyone. I'll send it to Janelle. I think Janelle, I already did send it to you. The list of who's going to attend and what the topics are.
Yes, I have a
Tom,
rough draft.
Tom, I've got a question. I've got a couple of questions. This is Anne Marie. I did look at the list. Janelle shared it with me, and I actually sent you an email earlier. One question, and this wasn't in my email, is why MS4? That just seems like a disjoint. It's not similar to the other types of things. That's really more a regulatory program about pollution.
Well, in as much, Mike Powell had suggested it from DENREC, and he felt that we really couldn't disconnect the flooding issue from the sea level rise issue. And given the fact that, and you're right, MS4 is mostly about point discharges, but part of MS4 is source control of water going into the storm drains. And
Okay.
that aspect of it, since we're talking about flooding and stormwater management design, I felt was important. Now we're going to keep that part short.
Okay. My other
yeah.
question is, you didn't have anybody from the Division of Climate and Energy. Susan Love is the director there. And I think it's really,
Actually,
go ahead.
There is from DENREC. I'm trying to remember who it is from. It's DENREC Climatology.
I didn't, they don't have a climatology section. I'm looking for the email with the list.
Anne Marie, I'll get back. You and I can talk about that then. That was,
Yeah, I think it's really important that we have the Division of Climate, especially because they are, they're the lead on the State Climate Action Plan, which I think ties in again to a lot of what we're talking about here.
and the person I've been in contact with was someone that Mike Powell had put me in contact with, and that person, and I'm going blank on the name, I apologize, I don't have it in front of me.
I have what you sent Janelle. You have Mike Powell, Jen Rushi from MS4 and Gordon Woodrow. You have Gina Tom, or
Right.
Gina Ton, but she's with Shoreline and Waterway Management. She's not with Climate. And that's it from DENRAC.
Anne Marie, what would you want Susan Lowe's group to be saying? What are you thinking needs to be said?
Well, again, they're
Handle at another time. Can we continue with the Planning Commission agenda?
Well, thank you, Melanie. I'm trying to coordinate, though, the two things. And the next question I had to ask was, are these people going to respond to the draft that you're working on the first two components of Sea Level Rise?
No. I mean, they provided input, but we've not sent them. I mean, this is a local planning issue. These groups.
But one of the things the city council said they wanted us to do was to focus on Lewes, as Bonnie was differentiating the first two workshops being more theoretical or global as opposed to focused on Lewes. I thought the theme that I was describing of solutions was indeed intended to focus on Lewes. So I'm wondering whether or not there is the possibility or value, and I would turn to Anne Marie and Janelle for comments on it, of having them respond to the resiliency and the other component that you'd like to move forward on as part of the workshop.
I think it's a really, really interesting idea, Drew.
Well, and I think from the experience of the wetland buffer, I mean, I think that by Kay having a draft or a concept available, I think that they gave really useful input on kind of where we were going and helped to kind of refocus in a way that was, I think, very beneficial and yielded a good product.
Yeah, I think you have to put a picture frame around this. And because this issue goes in so many different directions, that anything to focus people's attention is critical.
I guess, without trying to be defensive, but some of these groups like NOAA or climatology, I mean, they're providing the regulatory basis for what the 100-year rainfall event is. And so they're not going to provide necessarily input. Now, we have had the American Flood Association, Sea Grant, and I have sent this to Sussex County Conservation District for their input. But there's two aspects to the water workshop. Part of it is the bigger picture science of what's going on in the coastal area. I mean, they're not presenting a global view. They're providing a view of what's going on in our area. And I'm not sure they're going to necessarily provide or have input into a specific ordinance. I could be wrong.
Well, yeah, I guess it's the confluence of these two things at once that is concerning me. I mean, on the one hand, having a general discussion, I mean, it's always good to educate people, right? That goes without saying. But if what I guess what I'm looking for is how will your workshop help people understand the proposal that you're putting forward for sea level rise in Lewes? I mean, I guess I'm just hoping that we can have a general education, but also one that helps people understand what the Planning Commission is considering here.
Tom, I think as a former regulator, I think the opportunity for people who have scientific and other basis for evaluating our current situation, you know, sometimes we don't ask them the question, the practical question, what would they do if they were wearing a regulator or a city council position to solve a problem? And I think we need to begin to take their expertise and see if we can challenge them to come up with evaluation or recommendations for solutions. I don't see any harm in doing that. We have both aspects in the presentation where they're talking about their findings, but also then trying to evaluate what you want to do, what your subcommittee wants to do. It seems to me it's an effort worth focusing on. As Bonnie was saying, it worked before, but I think also we never ask those folks specifics. What would you do if you were regulating or trying to anticipate some of these issues? How would you translate that into a legal framework to protect your community? Well,
I have no problem with that, Drew. I have no problem with that at all.
Okay, let's you and I have another discussion offline about
Sure.
this.
Yeah, I have no problem trying, sending and seeing what input we get from them. Some groups may give us some may not.
But I want to get as much stuff out before the meeting, the water workshop, the 1st through the 5th, whenever it is, for people to see and perhaps comment on. And then we should talk about when the next time we want to take up after the workshop, the results of the workshop. And maybe that's a special meeting, maybe that's just a regular meeting, but we need to think about that.
But the intent was to have all the presentations up on the website beforehand.
Great. Perfect. Okay. I'm going to, Tom, if I can I move us on then to reports? And is there anything else Sea Level Rise wants to talk about?
I just want to address a question in the chat. It may be the only question that we haven't addressed, and maybe everybody's comfortable with it. But Brent Jett, the tireless member of the GMB crew that's been working with us, made a good comment here. And I think I guess, Brent, I'd be happy to further talk with you about this because I think it's an important topic. So maybe we talk about it offline.
And I think that's also why we did it high level. It's if you're in the floodplain, you're subject to it. We're not saying specific, we're not getting parcel detailed is what Brent's comment is. And if anybody has questions or concerns, just please let me know and I can pass them on to Tom and Sumner and Bob so we can discuss them at our next subcommittee meeting, please.
When is that, Tom?
November 4th.
Yeah.
11 a.m.
Okay, zoom away. All right, Melanie, let's go to floodplain, Phil.
We have had a meeting and have reviewed more of the existing code and made some suggestions, but we haven't finished it yet. We have a meeting tomorrow. Maybe we'll finish it tomorrow.
All right, one of the questions the council asked us, and I should have done this slightly differently with sea level, but they've asked us to consider, and Councilperson Osler was one of the primary movers in this, if and when we need additional expert assistance, do we need, should we ask for it? When should we ask for it? So keep that in mind as you're working on Phil, action plan, water workshop, whatever. If we need additional expertise on ordinances or other things that we're working on, council has told us to come back to them when we can show the basis for such request. And I just want to reiterate to everybody that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. If we have ideas, who else could help us? If it might cost a little bit, we may be able to get that taken care of.
And floodplain committee meeting is the 28th at 3 p.m. via Zoom.
Thank you, Janelle. All right, action plan.
We met this week. Janelle thrashed into shape all of our ideas. She has created a chart ranking the proposal, responsibility, the difficulty of accomplishing this, a time frame, a status, and whether or not a consultant is necessary. So our task by close of business this week is to rank each of these high, medium, low priority. So we are next going to meet to discuss that on Monday, November 16th at 3:30 via Zoom. And we should have this ready to present to Planning Commission for our December meeting.
So you're meeting before the meeting the next week?
I'm sorry?
Did I understand you say you're meeting the subcommittee before our full committee meeting?
November.
No, the 16th.
November
Monday.
16th.
November 16th, sorry. Okay. All right, well, that sounds like you made a lot of progress. Thank you, Janelle, and team action plan. You look like your action plan is in motion.
Yes, it is.
All right, can we move on then, unless there are questions for action plan subcommittee? Can we move on to reports from the city solicitor, city manager at all? Glenn, do you have anything you wanted to call to our attention?
Mr. Chairman, I was only going to mention the 5G public hearing that was held last night. Good discussion on an ordinance that you all have worked a lot on. There was one question raised during the public comment period about the waiver process for waivers from the design guidelines. If you remember that waiver that Janelle worked on would take a waiver to the Planning Commission. There's a little bit of concern about whether the timing would allow for us to get through the full process. Remember, there's 60 and 90-day shot clocks. I think Janelle and I will probably be looking at some alternatives to exactly how the waiver process looks, but that's the only thing that came up as it relates to the Planning Commission. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Anne Marie? You're muted.
I think you've heard enough from me tonight, I'm sure.
That's a first. Janelle, is there anything else on your plate that you wanted to share with us?
I just wanted to let everybody know, as I mentioned before, someone had brought it up, that the city received a grant from FEMA to do a West Cedar Street hazard mitigation planning study. And we are currently taking public feedback. What we are gearing towards people who live on the beach north of Savannah, between the canal and the bay, to get their impact on flooding. But if you have experience with flooding in that area, we are just focusing on that area, not citywide, because that's what the grant is for. There is a webpage on the city's website just for the West Cedar Street plan, and there is an online survey that we are encouraging people to take to let us know where they have witnessed, and if they have documentation, that would be great, of flooding in that area. And that is currently live. We are taking comments, and the survey is open through November 9th.
Is there any plan to try and contact residents down there to get them, to notify them about the survey?
A letter was sent out to 440 some odd people, and we sent out a code red to all of them as well. If they had signed
the code red hasn't gone out.
Oh, so that'll go out shortly.
So
I have on Cedar Street, or Rhode Island actually, and I haven't gotten it.
They went out yesterday.
All right.
So one point, listening to, I guess, maybe mitigation team meetings that Mayor Becker always makes a point of pointing out is that many of the owners of many of these homes may not have direct evidence in many cases because they're not here at the time of year when the flooding is worst. So, I look forward to seeing what we get. We may not get a complete picture, or, close to a complete picture.
We're just asking for as much public information as possible for that area, just to kind of give us an idea of how we can come up with solutions to address some of the flooding.
Well, we know from one of our other applications that many residents are very good with their phone or camera taking pictures of flooding. So I'm optimistic that there will be more input than perhaps we're anticipating.
Right. If you have a photo, great. If you don't, just let us know. You can drop a pin as to where you've identified flooding.
Okay,
or if
Joe.
you're a property owner.
Joe, do you have any reports on your liaison function?
With H Park, no, we're good. We're just rolling along slowly.
Any other commissioners want to offer any thoughts or ideas that we should think about? Okay, hearing none at the moment. I guess everybody's getting tired. Let's move on then to the minutes. We first have the minutes from August 19th. Are there any corrections or changes to those minutes as drafted and prepared and attached to the agenda? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve them as submitted?
So moved.
Joe moves. Second, who's going to second it? Just raise a hand, somebody.
Second.
Sumner, second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? All right, consideration approval of the September 16th meeting minutes. Do we have any corrections or changes or additions to that?
No, Jackie did an excellent job as usual.
I have one that I'm not sure that how we do this in the past. I thought that the letter of resignation from the former secretary should be included in the minutes or attached there too. They were not. How are they then available to somebody else to look at, Anne Marie?
I'm sorry. I missed the beginning of what you said.
Mark Harris resigned and submitted a letter, which he
Right.
read, which is only loosely referenced in the minutes. I thought that would be an attachment to the minutes, but how is that customarily handled if somebody wants to see his letter of resignation?
We can add his comments as an attachment. Did he hand it in?
I believe he did.
Okay.
We'll get.
I think maybe, was it addressed to the mayor? I can't remember who it was addressed to, but I think it was addressed to somebody. So
I can get it to Jackie.
It was very eloquent, and so I do think that we should be able to attach it to the minutes.
It was given to the commissioner, whether it was addressed to us or not, I don't remember, but I think it was meant to be communicated to all of us. So I think it's an important part of the minutes because I thought it was a very thoughtful and sincere approach to his responsibilities on the ethics committee and the conflict potential that he was eliminating. All right, is there objection to those being attached to the minutes of September 16th? Is there then a motion to approve the minutes of September 16th as amended?
So moved.
Melanie?
I have one correction I'd like to make in the minutes. In my report on the floodplain committee, there was a line that said, no modifications needed for organics standard. That should be deleted. It makes no sense. I don't know what it was.
All right, so we have a second amendment. Is there objection to Melanie's amendment? Hearing none. Melanie, are you now moving to approve the minutes as twice amended?
I am.
Second, somebody, just raise a
I'll
hand.
second.
Go. All right, all in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Any opposed or abstaining? Minutes passed as amended. Who wants to make the famous motion to adjourn?
So moved.
John Sabas. Melanie seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Adios.
Bonnie, you object?
everybody.
You want to stick around?
do I want to stick around?
No, did you want us to stick around? I was teasing you that you objected.
Well, this is like my 8th hour of city meetings today.
Yes.
So I'm definitely.
Bonnie and I have spent the day together since
We
9
have.
o'clock.
We have.
Thank you all very much for all your time and effort, both at this meeting and preparing for it, as well as the hard work you've all done. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Stay safe.
Bye now.
Thank
you.
Becoming zombies.